Unit 10 Social and Human Development. Contents 10.1 Introduction, 10.2 Growth Models of Economic Development, 10.3 Criticism of Growth Oriented Theories of Development, the Need for a Holistic Perspective, 10.4 The Human Development Reports from Income to Cultural Freedom, 10.5 What is Human Development, 10.6 Measuring Human Development, 10.7 Critical Evolution of Human Development Approach, 10.8 Conclusion, 10.9 Further Reading. Learning objectives. In this unit, you will learn about the need for criticizing dominating development models and critically evaluate growth models of development, need for a holistic perspective, and human development report and a critical evaluation of it. 10.1 Introduction. When the term development is mentioned, the immediate association one is of wealth. When we ask people who are the developed nations, often answer refers to countries such as United States of America, Japan, Germany, and so on. The so-called development nations and so on. What is development? Again, the association is with wealth. A lot of industries, everybody owning car, good roads, skyscrapers, and so on. This association of wealth with development has struck the popular imagination, and therefore for a lot of people development means a lot of wealth. This idea of development goes back to the adoption of growth models to achieve development, especially via newly emerging nation states that were trying to emulate the success and riches of the wealthy or developed nations of the West. It has generally been agreed that economic growth and income levels are important, but more important is how well the resources of wealth are exploited for general well-being of human beings. Some countries have been successful in managing their growth to improve the human condition. However, there is no automatic link between economic growth and better human conditions. And if a link is seen, what one ponders, what are those conditions or policies that translate high income level into human development? We will be addressing these and other questions related to the issue of human development in this unit on social and human development. This unit will begin with the discussion by analyzing the antecedents of human development in the growth models of development, which were adopted by many countries, and how these models failed to meet human development needs. We will then discuss what human development is and in what way it is a holistic perspective as compared to the growth model. We will also examine the various factors and indices to measure human development. The Human Development Report prepared by UNDP, United Nations Development Programme, will be examined and analyzed to see what the relative positions of different countries are. If certain countries are lagging behind in achieving this human development potential, then it will be worthwhile to look into the conditions and policy issues that come in the way of human development. Our particular interest in India, but we will be looking at the Indian situation in the context of other nations and the global perspective as well. 10.2 Growth Models of Economic Development. In this section, we will talk about the dominant ideas and discourse of development which held sway and which continue to hold the imagination of people whenever there is a discussion on economic development. Before we go on to discuss some of the main features and principles and the leading thinkers of this model of development, let us look at the philosophical and conceptual linkages of the concept of development. Economic development or development is a term that economists, politicians, policymakers, academicians, and lay people have used widely, so much so that it became a household term in late 20th century. The concept, however, has been in existence in the West for centuries. Modernization, westernization, and especially industrialization are the other terms people have used when discussing economic development. The word development is invariably associated with ideas of progress. The concept of progress, in turn, finds its root in the concept of evolutions, which has captured the imagination of scholars of the 19th century. For instance, when Auguste Comte talked about the progress of society, he visualized societies moving from the simple to a complex and yet rational scientific state. This also implied that one moved from a society dominated by non-scientific cultural and mold dominated by age-old tradition to one where rationality and the scientific spirit dominated. Thus, when newly independent nations of the post-colonial world strove to develop themselves, the idea that they needed to adopt modern rational ideas was very influential. Along with modernization, another concept that came to be closely associated was industrialization. The idea of progress, as we mentioned, was evolutionary and linear in its implication. Therefore, the countries which were not developed has to go through, even if by grafting the infrastructure and such conditions, a stage similar to that of those which was developed already. The developed countries had a predominant industrial ways, and of course they all went through a history of social progress process of industrialization. When we examine some of the theories of economic development which advocated growth in terms of income or heavy industry, they were very much influenced by the discourse of that time. Let us briefly look at some of these theories. By end of World War II, various countries were struggling to take their nations forward and progress the way the former colonial countries have progressed. A variety of theories were offered around this period. A linear stage theory, the idea of different stages of development, as we have mentioned, goes back to ideas of evolutionism, which finds echoes in Adam Smith and Karl Marx. Adam Smith first noted that every society goes through four stages, namely hunting, pastoral, agricultural, and manufacturing. According to Karl Marx, there are four stages through which every society must go, namely feudalism, capitalism, socialism, and communism. Walt W. Rousseau's stage of growth model of development is yet another addition to these ideas. The argument that the historical experience of the development countries in transforming their agriculture subsistence societies to a modern industrial gains may have important lessons for the developing countries led to the formation of Rousseau's stage of theories. B. Structural change model. Following the prescriptions of Harrod and Domer, who feel that the main obstacle or constraint to development is the relatively low level of new capital formation in most poor countries. Arthur Lewis comes up with another variation on the growth model. According to him, investment in industrialism would attack rural folk to urban areas, and this in turn would provide higher standard of living as they would earn more wages. Furthermore, as the level of labor productivity was so low in traditional agricultural areas, people living in the rural areas would have virtually no impact or output. Indeed, the amount of food available to the remaining villagers would increase as the same amount of food would be shared amongst fewer people. This might generate a surplus which would be then sold, generating income. Thus, people that moved away from the villages to the towns would earn increasing income, and this in turn generates more saving. According to Lewis, the lack of development was due to the lack of saving and investment. This was to development was to increase saving investment. A growing industrial sector, growing labor provided the incomes that would be spent and saved. This would be in itself generate demand and also provide funds for investment. Income generated by industrial sectors was expected to trickle down throughout the economy. There was great deal of criticism of this model from the so-called third world countries. They offered critique which pointed out to the vested interest of these Western models. You must have already familiarized yourself with some of this in previous unit. After the initial turmoil created by the dependence theory subsidized and the neoclassical economists bounced back with another set of theories which became known as the neoclassical counter-revolution. Neoclassical counter-revolution. Unlike the independence theories which believed that the underdevelopment was an extremely induced phenomenon, the people behind the neoclassical counter-revolution believed that the underdevelopment is an internally induced phenomenon. The central argument of the neoclassical counter-revolution is that underdeveloped result from the poor resource allocation due to the incorrect pricing policies and too much state intervention by our interfering governments. The third world is underdeveloped because of the heavy hand of the state and the corruption, inefficiency and lack of economic incentives that permeates the economies of developing nations. According to this theory, what is needed is the promotion of free and open market and laissez-faire economics within the context of permissive governments that allows the magic of the marketplace and the invisible fans of market prices to guide resource allocation and simulate economic development. 10.3 Criticism of growth-oriented theories of development. The need of a holistic perspective. The presupposition offers by the above theories were adopted by the first generation of newly independent nations. They generally accepted that they were poor because they were traditional and had followed subsistence agriculture based production. Hence, there was an initial investment in heavy industries, as was done by in India too. The adoptions never really did yield a result, and the theories themselves came under heavy criticism, especially for the hitherto colonized and newly independent nations who were in race to climb the development ladder. Underlying these theories were a series of both economic and deeper philosophical assumptions which were highly Eurocentric and Western oriented. In some of these theory, especially Rostow's, the assumptions that underdeveloped countries has no history of development since they were still at this first stage of being a traditional society in a historical proposition. It suggested that so-called underdevelopment countries have no history of development. An examination of colonial history shows that this is not the case. The burgeoning industries, mostly traditional one, were deliberately destroyed. The recursion of the cotton textile industry in India is an example of that. There are numerous such instances in the colonial history. Furthermore, classical and neoclassical theories, with their stress on consumption and huge investment, have been found to be unsuitable, upsetting the fragile economical balance by providing the development West as a model to the emulate. As the last stage of Rostow's model suggests, there is a continued sense of inequality as more countries compete for fewer resources. It is only the rich and the powerful who invariably have access to the Earth's resources, creating an inequitable situation. The developed countries account for only a quarter of the world's population. They consume approximately 80% of the world's resources. Thus, the goal of mass consumption for the development world is impossible, as this level of consumption cannot be sustained for a larger number of people. Some of these points were not only raised by the advocates of dependency theories of Latin America, but by all third world countries. And as more facts and figures started pouring into the state of ecology and the environment, particularly at the Earth Summit in 1990, it was realized that the growth models were far from sustainable. Most of the above discussions theories were so pro-capital and pro-manufacturing. It was increasingly found that the creation of surplus and more wealth did not necessarily create well-being. Not only that, the wealth which was invariably intended to trickle never did. Apart from the economic and environmental perspective in the development critic, there was a spat of criticism from social and cultural perspective. Though there were certain revisions and new approaches which addressed the human angles, like the human resource development approach and the basic human needs approach. The human resource development approach looked at human potential as a means to further capital accumulation. Human beings were the supply apart from that commodity production. They were not the ends of themselves. The welfarist model and the basic needs approach looked at human beings as beneficiaries of development rather than an active participant. According to the basic needs approach, provision of basic needs such as food, water, shelter was important. It's a large sense. They did not look at the human being as the goal of development. In the later 1980s and in 1990, there were a series of development critiques which emerged within sociology and anthropology. These critics questions the basic philosophical and epistemological orientation of development. They felt that the development discourses drive to manipulate and dominate nature, and the non-linear view of history needs to be critically examined. This approach is center of the analysis of development as a cultural discourse and the role that it plays in shaping the defining reality. Many anthropologists in this framework, but not all, call for the abandonment or deconstruction of the whole epistemological and political field of post-war development towards a post-development era. They argue that the pervasiveness of development discourse and ideology denaturizes the historical and political realities of the development enterprise. It is argued that the development discourse acts as a regime of representation of hegemonic worldview that systematically shapes and constructs identities of the so-called third world people and does not allow people to think of alternative organizing principles of the attainment of well-being. Those works most associated with this type of post-development critique are those of Arturo Escobar, Wolfgang Sanchez, Renema, and Bautry. It is criticisms like these which together raise many questions on the issue of what well-being is. After all, the national averages of income and wealth not capture the actual situation of distribution of incomes. It was increasingly realized that the development has to capture the many-sided aspects of well-being that address not only the basic needs of human beings, such as food, clothing, shelter, access to health, etc., but such social issues as gender equality as well as and also address issues of sustainability. The holistic perspective was increasingly brought forth to the center stage, particularly in late 1980s and 1990s. Various methods were sought to look at comparative pictures of societies that address these social issues rather than per capita income, etc. Countries which were believed to be very wealthy did not necessarily have greater equality of incomes or good human right records. So many factors were taken into consideration which address the overall well-being of the people, that this came to be known as human development. The United Nations Development Program was the first to come up with the report in the year 1990, then addressed the human aspect of development. While acknowledging the importance of growth in national production, it wanted to see how this growth translates into or fails to translate into human development in various societies. Let us examine this seminal report called the Human Development Report, which was undertaken under the flagship of the project director Mahbubul Haq. Reflections and Action 10.1. One obvious outcome of development discourse has been a desire on the less developed nations to imitate the ways of the developed nations, not only in terms of technologies but in lifestyles too. In our own Indian context, the reference group, a group of emulsion, has been the rich and the urban dwellers. A sign of wealth is not only the human one but the trapping that show you are wealthy and modern as well. For example, in a village society in India, a puka, a cemented house, is preferred over a thatched house. There are many such instances of imitations and adoption of so-called modern and developed technologies and lifestyles. In this context, the following questions are arise. Do you think that modern preferences of architectures are environmentally sustainable, especially in a hot desert climate, for instance? Can you think of other elements of imitations which you think are environmentally and economically unsustainable? Do write down them. Give few examples of what you think are good development programs in the context of rural India. Explain why you think they are good examples. 10.4 The Human Development Report, From Income to Cultural Freedom. The Human Development Report 1990 was the first in a series of reports which brought to the people into the center stage of development debate, as it outlined the foreword of the report in 1990. It says that the purpose of development is to offer people more options. One of their option is access into income, not as an end to itself but as a means to acquire human well-being. But there are other opinions as well, as including long life and knowledge, political freedom, personal security, community participation, and guaranteed human rights. People cannot be reduced to a single dimension as economic creatures. The report is essentially meant to point out to those aspects of development that address human dimensions. It is not meant to be a model of development like the ones that have been advocated earlier, for instance, the growth models. The report is meant to analyze practical country experience to distill practical insight. Its purpose is neither to preach nor to be recommended as any particular model of development. Its purpose is to make relevant experience available to all policymakers. The Human Development Reports make contribution in measure and policy analysis of human development. While the first report brought in the very notions of human development, subsequent reports have addressed various specific issues of human development, the social, political, and economic. The latest report, for instance, stresses on cultural liberty in today's diverse world. The report attempts to capture through figures and facts difficult and slippery phenomena and concepts such as cultural liberty and cultural diversity according to the Human Development Report 2004. Human development requires more than health, education, a decent standard of living, and a political freedom. People's cultural identity must be recognized and accommodated by state, and people must be free to express their identities without being discriminated against in other aspects of their lives. In shorter, cultural liberty is a human right and an important aspect of human development, and thus worthy of state and action and attention. Now let us have a look at the various themes and foci of Human Development Reports starting from 1990 to 2004. In 1990, the concept and measure of human development. The report addresses as its main issue the question of how economic growth translates or fails to translate into human development. The focus is on the people and how the development enlarges their choices. The report discusses the meaning and measurement of human development, proposing a new composite index. In 1991, financing human development. Lack of political commitment rather than financial resources is often the real cause of human development. This is the main conclusion of Human Development Report 99 and the second in a series of annual reports on the subject. 1992, Global Dimension of Human Development. The richest 20% of the population now receives 150 times of income of the poorest 20%. The report suggests two prolonged strategies to break away from this situation. First, making massive investment in their people and the strengthening national technological capacity can enable some developing countries to acquire a strong competitive edge in international markets within the East Asia industrializing tigers. Second, there would be a basic international reforms, including restructuring of the Bretton Woods institutions and setting up a development Security Council within the United Nations. In 1993, people participation. The report examines how and to what extent people participate in events and process that shapes their lives. It's look at the three major means of people participation, people-friendly markets, decentralized governance, and community organization, especially NGOs, and suggests concrete policy measures to address the governing problems of increasing unemployment. In 1994, New Dimensions of Security. The report introduces a new development of human security which equates security with the people rather than territories, with the development rather than arms. It examines both the national and the global concerns of human security. In 1995, Gender and Human Development. The report analyzed the progress made in reducing gender disparities in past few decades and highlights the wide and persistent gap between women's expanding capabilities and limited opportunities. Two new measures are introduced for ranking countries on a global scale by their performance in gender equality, and there followed an analysis of the under-evaluation and non-recognition of a new work of women. In conclusion, the report offers a 5-point strategy for equalizing gender opportunities in the decade ahead. In 1996, Economic Growth and Human Development. The report argues the economic growth, if not properly managed, can be jobless, voiceless, rootless, and futureless, and thus detrimental to human development. The quality of the growth is therefore as important as its quantity for poverty reduction, human development, and sustainability. In 1997, Human Development to Eradicate Poverty. Eradicating poverty everywhere is more than a moral imperative, it is rather a practical possibility. That is the most important message of the Human Development Report 1997. The world has the resources and the know-how to create a poverty-free world in less than a generation. 1998, Consumption for Human Development. The high levels of consumption and production in the world today, the power and the potential of technology and information present great opportunity. After a century of vast material expansion, will leaders and people have the vision to seek and achieve more equitable and more human advance in the 21st century. 1992, Globalization with a Human Face. Global markets, global technology, global ideas, and global solidarity can enrich the lives of people everywhere. The challenges is to ensure that the benefits are shared equally and that this increasing interdependence works for people, not just for profit. The report argues that globalization is not new, but that the present era of globalization, driven by competitive global markets, is outpacing the government, the governance of markets, and the repercussions on people. 2000 Human Rights and Human Development. Human Development Report 2000 looks at the human rights as an intrinsic part of development and a development as a means to realizing human rights. It shows how human rights bring principles of accountability and justice, social justice, to the process of human development. In 2001, making new technologies work for human development. Technology networks are transforming the traditional map of development, expanding people's horizon and creating the potential for to realize and decade progress that requires generations in the past. In 2002, deepening democracy in a fragmented world. This report is first and foremost about the idea that politics is an important to successful development as economics. Sustained poverty requires equitable growth, but it is also required that poor people have political power, and the best way to achieve that in a manner consistent with human development objective is by building strong and deep forms of democratic governance at all levels of society. In 2003, Millennium Development Goals, a compact about nations to end human poverty. The range of human development in the world is vast and uneven, with astounding progress in some areas amidst stagnation and dismal decline in others. Balance and stability in the world will require the commitment of all nations, rich and poor, and a global development compact to extend the wealth of possibility to all people. In 2004, cultural liberty in today's diverse world. According to people's growing demands for their inclusion in society, for respect of their ethnicity, religion, language takes more than democracy and equitable growth. Also need to multicultural policies that recognize differences, champions diversity, and promote cultural freedom so that all people can choose to speak their language, practice their religion, and practice in shaping their culture so that all people can choose to be who they are. As we can see from the above accounts that the reports have tried to capture many aspects of choices that people have or do not have that go into the making of development of human beings. Various indices have been developed over the time to be able to present a contrasting picture as well as to capture many aspects of human development. Thus, it seems that through these reports, one can see the expanding ambition of development and that addresses the changing process, situations, and choices that people have. You must be wondering, if human development is all inclusive, then what it is all about. Let us try and understand what human development is in our next section. 10.5 What is human development? The notion of human development essentially addresses the human in development. All those elements which makes a person human, not only in terms of what he or she needs for basic survival such as food, clothing, or shelter, health, etc., but a sense of dignity, what Adam Smith called the ability to mix with others without being ashamed to appear in public. It is the process of enlarging people's choices. The human development approach look at incomes as means, not as ends, to people's development. In contrast with the earlier growth models, it is felt that there is no automatic link between income growth and human progress. HDR 1990 has the following to say: the term human development here denotes both the process of widening people's choices and the level of their achieved well-being. It also helps in distinguishing clearly between the two sides of human development. One is the formation of human capabilities such as improved health or knowledge. The other is to use that people make of their acquired capabilities. In contrast to the earlier theories and models, the human development approach broadens the concept to not only include issues such as basic needs and income, but also people's choices on what people would have to be able to ensure their own livelihood without ending up these beneficiaries. Human development is moreover concerned not only with basic needs satisfaction, but also with the human development as a participatory dynamic process. It applies equally to less developed and highly developed nations. Box 10.1 Human development defined. Human development is a process of enlarging people's choices. In principle, these choices can be defined as infinite and change over time, but At all levels of development, the three essential ones are of people to lead a long and healthy life, to acquire knowledge, and to have access to resources needed for decent standard of living. If these essentials are not available, many other opportunities remain inaccessible. But human development does not end there. Additional choices, highly valued by many people, range from political, economical, and social freedom to opportunities for being creative and productive and enjoying personal self respect and guaranteed human rights. Human development has two sides: the formation of capabilities such as improved health, knowledge, and skills, and the use of people make of their acquired capabilities for leisure, productive processes, or being active in culture, social, and political affairs. If the scales of human development do not finally balance between the two sides, considerable human frustration may result. According to this concept of human development, income is clearly only one of the options what people would like to have, albeit an important one, but it is not the sum total of their lives. Development must therefore be more than just the expansion of income and wealth. Its focus must be people. 10.6 Measuring Human Development. The choices people make, as the development reports have pointed out, is a process which is best understood in the specific context of their time and space, for choices change and are specific to cultures. Some choices may seem irrational. Over the years, various human development reports have laid stress on different aspects of these choices. The question that comes to mind is as if the choices are so wide and specific to cultures. Is it possible to measure them? And is it possible to make comparison? The reports of 1990 does realize the problem of presenting a complex picture of all the choices people make. It says too many indicators would produce a perplexing picture, perhaps distracting policymakers from the main trends. The crucial issue, therefore, is of emphasis. In the initial reports, three indicators were considered most important and comparative figures were provided. The three elements which were considered essential to human life are longevity, knowledge, and a decent living standard. There is no standard mechanism for measuring human development indicators. For example, longevity can be calculated by longevity at birth as an indicator. For the second indicator, knowledge, literacy figures are the main indicators. Though there are debates about what kind of literacy, the quality of it, and so on. But literacy is still the beginning and therefore a good indicator. As for third element, decent living, it is very difficult to look for indicators. It requires data on access to land, credit, income, and other resources. Except for income, data on other indicators is rarely available. And even the indicators of income does not always tell the whole story, especially since incomes are mostly in national average. However, by actually looking at purchasing power of income helps in assessing the buying power of the money that people have. One of the major problems of calculating indicators is that they are shown as a national average. The average does not reveal the wide disparities that may exist in the society. For instance, there are wide disparities between male and female literacy as well as between the rich and the poor. These disparities exist for other indicators as well: health, longevity, and income. There have been attempts to adjust these disparities. If inequality is seen as reducing the value of average achievement as given by unweighed average mean, that can be adjusted by the use of inequality measures. Such distributional corrections can make a significant difference to an evolution of a country's performance. When it's come to other equality essential elements of human well-being, such as cultural freedom, security, human interactions, it becomes very difficult to conceptualize these categories and equally difficult to measure them. Box 10.2 Measuring Cultural Liberty. To date, cultural statistics have dealt with the production and consumption of cultural goods, film books and films, books and theatre. But can culture liberty and its opposites, living mode exclusion and social, economic and political exclusion along ethnic, linguistic or religious lines are measured? Measuring living mode exclusion. Language, religion, history, clothing, customs, ceremonies, cuisine and values, among other things, interact to define cultural identity. All of these ways to understand culture provide ways to exclude cultural identities such as language, policies, treatment of different religions, schools, curricula, and attitudes within society. Information can be collected on these issues, but rarely is. Beyond the simple data availability, problems are the analytical challenges of converting information into statistically useful numbers. One possible approach is qualitative assessment, expert assessment of the severity of the situation on issues that are important to many cultural identities, such as language and religion. Measuring participation exclusion. Measurement of social, economic, and so lesser extent political exclusions along ethnic, linguistic, and religious lines is more advanced. Often lacking, however, is a breakdown by culturally identified groups. Some data collections include, such as questions on religion, ethnic, and linguistic identity, and some post-census surveys focus specific on these cultural groups. But they could be more comprehensive and comparative. An important issue is allowing people to register multiple identities. Political exclusion is more difficult to capture. There are some hard data, such as representations in parliament and voter participation, but other issues, such as freedom of expression, movement, and organization, are more difficult to capture and require a qualitative approach. Next steps. More work can be done at the country level, where understanding of the issue may be greater. This could involve improved data monitoring and collection, such as including questions and on identities in survey questionnaires and post-census surveys targeted at specific cultural groups, as well as qualitative assessment. At the international level, leadership by an international statistical body could bring sharper focus to what is a formidable and urgent task. For example, the UNESCO Institute of Statistics have already done much work in measuring culture. The coordinating institutions could advocate for collection and information, such as the inclusion of national surveys of questions on cultural identity, and could be the lead depository for this data. In core qualitative areas of cultural and political exclusion, enormous benefits could accrue from having an international institutions take the lead on a comprehensive approaches to these complex issues that at country level. No index of cultural liberty. There are demands not only to produce statistics on issues of cultural, but also to go further and produce a cultural liberty index. A lesson of the Human Development Index and other composite indicators is that measures need not be grounded in a conceptual framework and must be policy relevant as well as measurable and comparable. Conceptual and methodological challenges are enormous for capturing such issues as discriminatory policies and social practices and an extent of political neglect that cultural groups face. The problem is more than empirical. Unlike some other aspects of human development, such as health and education, where many countries face common challenges, the challenges in dealing with cultural exclusion are more diverse. It will never be fully possible to compare homogeneous Japan with diverse India, or how Europe is dealing with the issues posed by immigration with how Latin America is meeting the demands of indigenous people for land self-rule. 10.7 Critical Evaluation of Human Development Approach. As we mentioned earlier, the human development covers many dimensions of well-being, but for the purpose of focus and measurability and comparability, the Human Development Report team had focused on three important elements of human development: the life expectancy or longevity, access to knowledge or literacy, and standard of living, which is largely measured in terms of income levels with its purchasing power. The Human Development Index focus on the three above mentioned indicators. The reports are aware, however, that although the HDI is a useful concept, it is important to remember that the concept of human development is much broader and more complex than any summary measure can capture, even when supplemented by other indices. The HDI is not a comprehensive measure. It does not include important aspects of human development, and notably the ability to participate in the decisions that affects one's life and to enjoy the respect of others in its community. Human Development Report 2004. The report adds that a person can be wealthy, educated, and healthy, but not participating in the development process that adds to his or her well-being. It is omissions like these which have been highlighted in the early reports of human development. In 1991, prompted by these omissions, there was an attempt to come up with a human freedom index and a political freedom index in 1992. These measures were popular, but they were soon abandoned, which is a testament to the fact that such complex phenomena are very difficult to quantify. Though they have been difficult to capture as a human development index, many reports have been attempted not to undermine the issue by the devoting several reports on aspects of such as democracy, political freedom, multiculturalism, etc. The HDI measures average achievements in a country but does not capture the differences in each category. Two countries with the same average literacy level may have disparities between men and women. The Gender-Related Development Index, introduced in Human Development Report 1995, measures the achievements in the same dimension using the same indicator as the HDI, but captures inequalities in achievement between men and women. It is simply that the Human Development Index is adjusted downwards for gender inequality. The greater the gender disparity in basic human development, the lower is a country's GDI related to this HDI. The countries with worst disparities between their GDI and HDI values are Saudi Arabia, Oman, Pakistan, Yemen, and India. The countries with worst disparities between their GDI and HDI. Similarly, having a high GDP index does not necessarily rank you high on HDI index, as well as being is not just about income alone. Some countries have done a lot to distribute their incomes much more equitable and have strived to provide health facilities and education. Thus, a country like Bolivia, which lower GDP per capita than Guatemala, have achieved a higher HDI because it has done more to translate the income into human development. Reflections and actions 10.2. As you might have noticed, in HDI ranking, India is way below some of the other countries who have much less GDP index. It is also have very low GDI. Make a list of countries in South Asia who have less GDP than India but who have rank higher than India in HDI. What do you think are the main reasons for human gender disparity in India? Do you think elements of development such as political participation and freedom are more or as important as life expectancy and education? Give reason for your answer. The Human Development Report has been a welcome change and major critique of mainstream welfare economic and growth-oriented measures of economic development, and to that extent it has brought about a humane orientation to economics. The human development approach is not, however, without some lacunae. We address some of these shortcomings in this section and critically evaluate the reports. Our vantage point of evaluation is largely from sociological and social perspectives. A detailed analysis has been done on this approach from economic point of view, to which we refer in a cursory way. Underlying the human development reports are the contributions of Amartya Sen and his close associate Mahbul Haq. The report was influenced greatly by concepts such as capabilities, which was introduced into the vocabulary of economics by Sen. He introduced the term capabilities to understand the multidimensional aspects of well-being in terms of choices people make for their capabilities. The concept of capability or choices attempt to identify. The concept of capability or choices attempt to identify what those choices may be. Included in some basic and valid choices are such elements as empowerment, equity, sustainability, membership in a community or group, and security. Various attempts were made to capture these elements in this series of reports, which are published over the years. The HDI, as a measure of relative achievements of various countries, remains the chief indicators of development. And as a more critics like Apthor have pointed out that this measure only captures such items as longevity, education, and income, which only captures human capital and not choices that people make. Another point which was raised by Ador, who is an influential anthropological voice in development studies, is that the Global Human Development Report is dominated by economists and therefore remains as an economist dominated world. Through their plea has been to take it away from pure economics to social dimension. According to Epto, the human in the development report gives a good feeling, but it can divert attention from serious social and political analysis and hence from real understanding of human life. The social aggregates used are demographic trends and sectorial and never about social institutions, social structures, or social groups or categories. Besides this, the universalizing and global trends and categories do not reflect the differentiations within, and many times some of these categories are problematic. For instance, when we talk of freedom, we have to realize that what might be considered freedom by one set of people might be considered an oppression by others. For example, wearing a veil might be liberating for some women who want to escape from over sexualized treatment of women in the West. In the human right debates, there has been many such voices which has pointed out to this kind of universalization and how they do not necessarily represent communities and people's categories. One of these charges leveled against human categories in the human development approach is that they stem from a liberal position which talks about individual aspiration and rights and choices and not about deeper levels of analysis. There have been a criticism that the categories and the terms do not have epistemological groundings. Ananja Mukherjee read in her critiques of the Human Development Report in 2004 and its recommendation of multiculturalism points out that while the report acknowledges the various symptoms of the problematic and multiculturalism, it refuses to acknowledge the resilience of the underlying structures that generate those symptoms. Read further, is anything really lost in speaking of issues and yet for the phenomena that these issues compromise as a totality? I believe so. As Marilyn the feminist philosopher explains with her metaphor of the bird cage, if one looks at a cage on wire at a time, then it is not quite clear how it might have the power to imprison a living being. If, however, one examines the cage in an entirety, focusing on the specific pattern which connects the wires to make possible the imprisonment, then a different picture emerges. The problem is not simply on one of omission. It gives the mistaken impression that the cage is only a simple sum of the wires, and that liberty can be won by removing one wire at a time. She also says that this kind of understanding comes essential for a distributive paradigm of justice. She quotes Young to report her argument as thus: the focus of distribution ignores and tends to obscure the underlying structural institutional context within which those distributions takes place. This context involves by structures or practices, the rules and norms which guide them, and the language and symbols that mediate social interactions within them, and institutions of state, family, and civil society as well as the workplace. This emphasis on patterns of distribution is typical of liberal models of justice, which, as Marx pointed out, frequently presuppose institutions of privately property, wage labor, and credit, when this might come into questions for a more critical conception of justice. Indeed, the precise goal of policy approaches premised on the liberal distributive model is to accommodate political demands within existing structures of property rights, gender relations, divisions of labor, and cultural norms. 10.8 Conclusion. There is no doubt that the human development approach, which it attempts to bring about social dimensions of development, is an improvement over the growth-oriented top-down approaches and models of development which really try to understand that human beings are the ends in an efforts to bring about development. In our first few sections of this unit, we have tried to see how this change was brought about and through a series of debates and new approaches. This unit has been essentially devoted to understanding the human development. Since Human Development Reports UNDP are a basic crux of this approach, we have referred to the series of reports extensively. We try to follow these definitions of problematics involved in trying to measure difficult and complex phenomena such as liberty, freedom, cultural rights, etc. While the efforts have been nobler on the parts of the team which put together the various reports, the endeavor has largely been one of bringing humane perspective and to economics and not a series of epistemological critiques of present practices of economics. This aspect has been brought out in our section on evaluation of these reports. 10.9 Further reading. Human Development Report 1990 by Oxford University Press and Human Development Report in 2004 Oxford Unity Press and Muhammadul Haq 1990 Reflections on Human Development by Oxford University Press, New Delhi. This is the end of Unit 10. Thank you very much.